when we talk about sharing faith, I think it really means representing Jesus, helping people know who Jesus is well, and helping them see Jesus clearly. Our role and our invitation from the Lord isn't to convert someone. We are here on this earth to live out our faith and be faithful in how we represent Jesus and build friendships with people.
What's the best approach for sharing Jesus with someone from a different faith background? We're continuing our Evangelism When series this week with a conversation around relationships with people from different cultures and faith expressions. What does it look like to share our faith when somebody already holds to a different faith? Turns out it's a lot like just being a good friend. We're joined by Eva Glick this week. Eva is an associate director with InterVarsity's International Student Ministry Department, and she is passionate about students and alumni like you developing meaningful relationships with people from different countries, cultures, and faith backgrounds. And Eva is going to help us prepare for representing Jesus well with our friends and neighbors who practice another faith. Welcome to After 4, your podcast for navigating life after graduation. I'm your host and guide, John Steele, and this one's for you, alumni. Eva, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, John.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad that you're here. Thanks for saying yes to being with us today. You're joining us for, I think, a very important series and a very important episode in that series. But before we get to that, Eva, would you just give a brief introduction, help our listeners get to know you a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I've been on staff at InterVarsity for almost 28 years, and
okay.
So I'm dating myself, obviously. And I work in the ISM, or International Student Ministry Department, as an associate director, which still surprises me to this day, because when I got started on staff, this was never something I thought I would do. And it wasn't until I met international students and it was so transformative. It really transformed my whole view of God. It just gave me a holistic picture of who God was. And so I wanted every American student to have an international friend, a friend from a different country. And hence, years later, about 10 years ago, I was invited to be in my particular role, which is focusing on what we call our multinational chapters, focusing on every chapter in InterVarsity having international student involvement. And so it's been really, really fun. And I love my job overall. And I also love to cook and try new things and meet people from different cultures and different places. And so my job just, that whole meeting with the international population really, really works well for me.
Yes, that sounds like a fantastic fit. And I'm so glad to hear those stories kind of coming into this conversation. Eva, you're joining us in a series where we are talking about what it looks like to share Jesus in different parts of our lives after graduation. We're coming from this time on campus with our chapter where we can try and fail and succeed and debrief and encourage one another. And we have these people right alongside us to sort of walk through a life of evangelism and growing and what it looks like to share Jesus with the people around us. And now in life after graduation, people like that might be hard to come by, that we can, at least in those early days. And so we want to come alongside our young alumni and help them as they think about what it looks like to share Jesus in these new contexts. And one of those places, I imagine people will encounter, and more than likely they will, is their neighbor down the road or their coworker or someone in life who comes from a different faith background. And so my hope is that our conversation today helps alumni feel prepared to engage well with people who are practicing a different faith and to come to the table together with those realities being the case. So, Eva, I'm hopeful that you have some practical tips for us. But before we do that, do you have a story that you can share about evangelism and sharing Jesus in spaces where people are practicing a different faith?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting because for me, after I graduated, I actually feel like I've encountered people of different faith backgrounds than I did in college. I definitely had a lot of friends who weren't Christians in college, but they were mostly agnostics and atheists. And so it's an interesting topic. It's something that I think a lot about. How do I engage with people who are of a different faith background? And I think before I dive into the story, I just want to say that, when we talk about sharing faith, I think it really means representing Jesus, helping people know who Jesus is well. And when it comes to people of a different faith background, very, very often they're coming from a different cultural background too, which I say more about that later. So it's about contextualizing. It's about helping them see Jesus clearly, not from my own cultural lens, recognizing that the way I engage my own faith is through my own cultural lenses. And how do I help them see Jesus clearly and perhaps even correct misconceptions about Christianity? And I think one thing that's really cool about people from other faiths is that first, as someone who's an atheist or whatnot, is that we're both seeking God. It's more about the fact that we have very different views and beliefs about God. And so I think what's cool is that we have the same starting point in some ways. So,
I think that's really helpful, Eva. I mean, just even the way that you framed that of representing Jesus well. And if that's sort of the posture that I bring with me into this, then evangelism brings up a lot of different feelings. Like I recognize that even as we titled this series what we did, that can spark a lot of different feelings. But I love that frame of representing Jesus well in these different spaces. And what does it look like? How is that contextualized into places where people come from different faith backgrounds, and that, hey, square one, we're in the same place of pursuing God. We're trying to figure out what does this look like to seek after God. And that I just want to say that's really helpful for me to hear that frame that you're providing for us. And but I know I cut you off, so please, if you're ready to jump into a story, I'd love to hear the story, your experience with this.
Yeah. So unlike many of you who are listening, who probably have coworkers who don't follow Jesus, I work for InterVarsity, so all my coworkers follow Jesus. So one story I can think of is my friend Miriam, who happens to be a refugee. I met her through a friend, and the friend said, "Hey, she needs a lot of practical help. Can you help?" And I was thinking about, I'm a very busy working mom. I don't have time, but Jesus does call me to care for the foreigner and people in need. And so sure, I can help with some practical needs. So one of our first encounters was me driving her around. I thought it would take an hour before I got to work. And so, I thought this isn't going to take long, but then it ended up taking at least 2 or 3 hours just driving her around.
Oh my goodness.
This didn't work and that didn't work. And she's on the phone the whole time, dealing with different things. And then after the 2 or 3 hours, I'm starting to get stressed about my deadlines. And she says, "Oh, I need a ride to the center to meet with an attorney." And I thought, this is 30 minutes away. And I thought, I just can't do this. And so I kept praying, and God brought to mind a friend from church who's retired. And I thought, I'm going to contact my friend Jenny, and Jenny could probably take her. So I cold called my friend, and she's like, "Oh, sure, I'm free. Just bring her over." And so I drive her over to Jenny's house, and we had this wonderful little encounter at her place. And then Jenny took over, and it ended up being the rest of the day thing with Jenny. And Jenny drove her around. And so I think I share the story because I realized, part of it is just that sharing faith and living out who Jesus is often in community. And so there's no way I could really fully represent Jesus to Miriam without community. And so over the years, I haven't had a lot of time for her. But what is cool about the after college context versus college is that, college is so concentrated. You hang out with your friends, you're together a lot. But then once you're out of school, sometimes it's hard to keep in touch. It's a very concentrated but short-term thing. Whereas people outside of college, a lot of times it's going to be a very long-term thing. We're just all around for years, So years later, even though I don't spend that much time with her, we connect here and there. I help her with random things, text messages. I see her here and there. And the last time I saw her, she's, been in a much better place. And she just started sharing with me, and, just her reflection on her last few years in the US. And
Okay.
she talked about the people who helped her, and all of us are followers of Jesus.
Wow.
And, and it was one of those moments where I was like, I really wanted to ask her, well, why do you think that is?
Yeah.
Because, right, like, to me, it's obvious, like, we love Jesus. We all care about you. We all are doing what Jesus calls us to do. And that's obvious why she's not getting help from people of her own faith, but from Christians. But we got interrupted, and I never got to ask her that questions. And I realized, part of sharing the story is like, it's like bumpy. We make mistakes, or we regret, like, boom, we mess up on things, and we kind of think, oh, I wish I did that, or I said that. And then, there's a lot of grace from God to be able to bring that back. So
Yes.
That's one story.
Yeah. Oh, I really appreciate that story, and a couple of the things that you're drawing out there, even just, talking about like no one person can represent Jesus fully, like the complexity and the beauty and just the wholeness of Jesus. To lay that expectation on just you, Eva, is unrealistic. And so to be able to have some of that handoff and like, oh, what does it look like to bring other parts of Christian community into this space, and to say like, wow, together we help provide a more holistic picture of what Jesus looks like to this person or to these people around us. And okay, how do I invite my friend who also loves Jesus into this process? And maybe there's a role for them to play too. And also it's not just when it comes to sharing faith or interacting with people from different cultures or different backgrounds, but in general, like you're just pointing out a reality of life after graduation, which is that relationships are much slower moving in that season. And that's just a good reminder for us in general of like setting a particular level of expectation for, what, this does not, whether it's just building a friendship of somebody that, now I have somebody to hang out and play board games with, or if it is like sort of a faith friend experience, that it's not just a bang, boom, it's done, we're there, we've reached the end goal all like really quickly kind of thing. It's like, this is a drawn out, slow moving process, which is part of the beauty, but is also something for us to maybe adjust to that new reality in life after graduation. So even just those kind of practical things are very, I love those realities of your story, and that it's not perfect, it's messy, it's bumpy, and that's okay. Like that's pretty normal actually. And that's probably what a lot of these interactions will look like. So I appreciate those, even just those perspectives that your story brings up for us.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's so true. And I think, part of what I love about connecting with people from different faiths is how much I'm gaining and how much I'm learning. People who ask really good questions about scripture and Jesus that a typical Christian and someone who grew up in the church wouldn't be asking. And so I think that's really helped me see Jesus differently. It's given me a more holistic picture of God. And it's also helped me be more grateful for everything I do have in my life. So Yes, absolutely. Well, so then, Eva, can we turn to maybe the practical side of things here? We've gotten to hear like this really fantastic story that just illustrates like one version of what this could look like. But if you were to sit down with an alum and who was saying like, "Hey, I've got some friends who practice a different faith, and I've got some opportunities to hang out with them. What do I do? Like, how do I, as you put it, how do I represent Jesus well in this space with them? What kind of tips would you give to them for engaging with these relationships, and to do it in a way that in the back of their mind it is, I want to bring Jesus into this relationship. How do I do that well?" Yeah. Well, I think one thing is recognizing the deep barriers. So many people of different faiths may be coming from a background where if they did decide to follow Jesus, there would be heavy persecution, whether that be political or social.
Wow.
And just to know that, and family expectations, it's part of their identity, right? So when you think of what I mentioned earlier about people from different faiths are generally very often from a different cultural background as well. And for most for religions, I would say culture and religion is very, very heavily intertwined, inseparable. And so when we think about that, then you can see why their families might have a real issue of them exploring who Jesus is. And over the years, I've gotten to know a lot of people who are really interested in Jesus, but their identity, like that's very, very hard to separate. And so just understanding that just means that we have to realize that the Holy Spirit, we have to really, really rely on the Holy Spirit. Not that we don't rely on the Holy Spirit in other settings, but when it comes to people with other faith, engaging other faiths, knowing that this is a long process, and it also just takes very serious prayer. I am personally convicted that I'm not praying enough or taking prayer more seriously when it comes to my friends. And I think, the fact that anyone, I would say, who really believes that their relationship with God and what they experience and have received from God is just like the best thing, would want their friends to experience the same thing, right? So knowing that with that motivation means that there's a cost, and sometimes that cost is sticking it out with a friend and having just a real commitment to praying and sometimes fasting even. So I think, one is just realizing the barriers and how hard it is for someone to, become followers of Jesus. I think the other thing, like I mentioned earlier, is helping Jesus know who Jesus is, helping people, however our friends know who Jesus is by representing him clearly. And I think whether we're trying to or not, we represent Jesus because people watch us. Whether it's your coworker or a neighbor or whatnot. And I just kind of feel like this day and age in the US, representing Jesus correctly is especially important because there are so many misconceptions out there and false images of who Jesus could be and all that. Yes. And so I think that how we live out our faith is really important. It just, like our actions speak louder than words. Yes. So what kind of friend are you? What kind of colleague are you? And then I think about a lot of other cultures are more high context, right? So even that in itself makes it more important for our actions to be the place that represents Jesus. So and I think so I don't know if you have any questions around that.
When you say high context and that especially making our actions meaningful, are you saying that there's a lot more interpretation in some cultures as far as like when they do this, it actually means, or this is sort of the subtext that goes along with that, as opposed to maybe just some of the flippant things that we might do without thinking about it?
Yeah. Like, for high context cultures tend to be more indirect, like indirect communication, nonverbal communication is more important, right? So they're observing, how do you live your life? How do you dress? All of that comes into play a lot more than a verbal direct conversation. And so I think about, I look back on how I've engaged with different people of different faiths, and way back when I was in college, a big popular thing to do was have these debates and forums, and people of different faiths would come and speak, right? And I think what I realized is that these kind of debates and intellectual arguments, at least today, I feel like it just doesn't get very far. But it's more how you live things out, and then I think it's how it's building relationships. So I think the third thing I would say is just making sure you're building a good bridge. It's a lot about listening and learning, and that also gives you space to earn your right to speak, right? And I think that friendship, listening and learning, just means that you're not jumping in assuming what they believe because someone from the same faith background two people from the same faith background could have very different beliefs because
Right.
of their family experiences and whatnot. Like my friend Miriam, the first time I drove her, I was just kind of shocked at, the way she was presenting herself. And I thought, okay, this is not what I expected of someone of her faith, or I just have to kind of remember that I'm coming in, I want to come in learning. And I think many of you who are alumni may have seen the approaching differences diagram. It's about approaching with openness. And so I think a lot of those experiences totally apply. And it's just really, I think what makes that good is that you don't have to know much about their faith background. It could be a religion you've ever heard of even, but it's that place to just be able to ask questions through your friendship. And it's a lot about being on their turf versus inviting them to just our turf. I just remember in college and even in my staff experiences, sometimes we could focus on inviting people to our events. And then yet, like, how often are we stepping on their turf, entering their homes and whatnot? And I think there are more opportunities to do that outside of college than in college, because I think, in college, people not all, but mostly are trying to fit into this context of the college campus. And so dorm rooms don't have much space to display their beliefs. Some might have an idol or something here and there, but not a full display. And so they might not be part of a temple or mosque or whatnot. So I think that stays out of college means that you get to see more of their lives, and you get to, it's always okay to invite yourself and ask if you can join them at something that they do, ways they celebrate their holidays and whatnot. So
yeah. It sounds to me like so much of what you're sharing, Eva, it has to do with a certain level of awareness, like self-awareness and awareness of these other people that you're interacting with, whether it's a coworker or your neighbor, whoever it might be, that there's a need for purposeful reflection about what is it that I believe about Jesus, and how am I representing that, and how does my culture and my context today influence the way that I might represent Jesus to people who don't know him? And what can I learn about the culture and context that this person comes through that might influence the way they interpret what I am presenting about who Jesus is, whether it's something that I'm saying, or if it's just the way that I'm engaging with them and the way that I carry myself, and that you don't want to walk blindly into these relationships, that you want to be pretty purposeful and thoughtful about it. And as we're talking about relationship, I actually had a conversation with an alum recently who talked about coming to faith in college with InterVarsity, and that one of the most important things that made it possible, and she came from a different faith background, and that one of the most important things for her taking steps towards Jesus was the fact that when she gave her, initial pushback and some long-term pushback about interest in Jesus, that some of the early people who brought up Jesus to her, they sort of just abandoned her. They're like, well, if you're not going to become a Christian, then there's really no reason for us to pursue a friendship together. And then she met InterVarsity, and the InterVarsity students were really people who were like, hey, we're doing this stuff, these events and these things like that. And she would like decline the ones that were more overtly like faith oriented. And they were like, that's totally fine. Do you still want to come to our study night, or do you want to come have a meal with us? And so like some of that, they were invested in her as a person and her as a actual, like, I think we could actually be friends, no matter what you say to my invitations about Jesus. And that was something that was so powerful for her in opening up. And for her, in her scenario, this isn't the case for everybody, but in her scenario, that was a really important part of her journey towards Jesus, who she's still, she's still following Jesus today. And it's like something she looks back on so fondly.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And it's so true, because it's like our role and our invitation from the Lord isn't to convert someone, right? Like we are here on this earth to live out our faith and be faithful in how we represent Jesus and build friendships with people. And I think that's too bad to hear that story about her first encounters with Christians who had an agenda. And I think
Yes.
That's really important to not do. But I think the other thing is just I realize like the importance of more of a two-way friendship is also super powerful, right? It's not like I have something to offer them and I'm going to teach them, but it's about receiving and giving. And I just remember, another friend of another faith was just meeting them, actually another refugee, and bringing some gifts to them over one holiday season. And then they wanted to give a gift back. And it was one of those moments where I felt like, and then they made food for me, and I wasn't something I liked actually, but I had to just honor them by eating it. And very much like some of our, our global program experiences, right? You eat it and you pretend you like it, and they sent you home with something, you're going to take it anyways, right? And it's a lot of it's just honoring people and seeing them on equal footing. We're not about them in any way, and in fact, just recognizing how much we can learn from them is super helpful in a healthy process. So.
Yeah, well, because if we really believe that this person is an image bearer of the Creator, then whether or not they are like in a faithful, like a following Jesus part of their life or not, there's still something about like in their uniqueness and their createdness as an image bearer of God. Like there's something about God to learn from this person. Like there's something about the way that He has made them and that He is at work in their life that's like, well, okay, Lord, what do you have to teach me from this relationship with this person? And that, like, I think that that's so helpful. That thought, like, this is a two-way relationship. We are both invested. We are both learning, and we are both walking away fuller versions of who God made us to be because of being in one another's lives, and that's a really good and helpful thing. And Eva, as we're talking through, like, these are some really helpful things for us to keep in mind. I'm wondering, one of our rhythms on the podcast here is just, I always ask our guests, do you have like a final sort of pastoral encouragement or a word of advice that you would give to alumni? Because whether or not we've had practice, like a lot of practice on campus, being in life after graduation, it's just like a whole new ball game. Whatever the circumstance is, like I experienced this 100 times on campus, but I'm not on campus anymore. And so I wonder if we can provide an extra word of encouragement or piece of advice as we close our time together today.
Yeah, I think my maybe main word of advice would be something that I say to myself as well, is to think more long-term and to lean more into God's role in this whole process, in making space to pray, making space to listen to God's guidance, and how He wants us to engage in these friendships. And, and part of that comes with the openness to see how God wants to transform me and grow me through these friendships.
Alumni, I'm sensing a theme in our episodes to this point. Evangelism just looks an awful lot like being a thoughtful friend. We listen when it's time to listen, we share when it's time to share, and through all of it, just show up for people. We're kind, we're compassionate, and we do our best to maintain a self-aware learning posture. All the more so when we're developing relationships with people from different faith backgrounds. We help people with practical needs, and we walk the meandering path of life and faith with them. Yes, we long to see people say yes to Jesus, but that's lived out in the context of genuine friendship and care. I keep saying this, but I hope through these conversations we're removing any lingering sense of anxiety and obligation and replacing it with love, compassion, and a willingness to let these things take the time they need. Eva, thank you so much for joining us today. We are grateful for your leadership on this topic. Alumni, check the show notes for links for a few more helpful resources from Eva. Then be sure to come back next week for our conversation about evangelism when I'm new in town. How do we get started with evangelism when we don't really know anyone? We'll talk about that next week. Until then, consider sharing this episode with someone who needs to hear it, and I will see you in the after, alumni. Thanks for listening to After 4. This podcast is brought to you by the InterVarsity Alumni Relations Team, hosted and produced by John Steele, production assistance by Mike Zentera, edited by Caleb Leppert, and our After 4 theme music was written and performed by John Steele.